Hello, U.S. history students, and welcome to the first of two lessons this week dealing with the end of the Cold War. Now, we're wrapping up the Cold War with these two lessons. As you go through this lesson, be sure you are taking down the information. You can take your own notes if you want, but I highly recommend you use the worksheet that I've uploaded to Canvas to help you keep track of the material we're talking about. There will be a little quiz on this lesson. It will not be open notes. Now, in this lesson, what we're going to be talking about, we're going to be talking about the impact of the Cold War on the United States. These are events that are going on throughout the course of the Cold War. We're going to talk about the arms race. We're going to talk about spies. We're going to talk about the McCarthy era. And then we're going to talk about the economic impact of the Cold War. Okay, so there's no really definite position of how this fits in with what we've been talking about before with all the events like Korea and Vietnam, things like that. This is happening simultaneously. Okay, so that's why I waited till now to do this, is it's happening while all the other events that we've been talking about are going on. Now let's start with the arms race. As you know, a key component to the Cold War is, and part of the reason we're so concerned about the Cold War is the development of nuclear weapons. Now, we have an atomic bomb. We used the atomic bomb back in 1945 against Japan. In 1949, the Soviets developed their first atomic bomb. And this is significant because the Soviets and us are the two superpowers. So we had the technology first. Now the Soviets have it. So both superpowers have the ability to create and detonate atomic bombs. Now that the Soviets have it, we want something bigger. So there's a race, and in 1952, both sides create the first hydrogen bomb and successfully test the first hydrogen bomb. What is going to happen now that both sides have atomic bombs, both sides have hydrogen bombs? What is going to happen is an arms race, which is a competition mainly between us and the Soviets to see who could make more weapons faster, who could make bigger weapons, who could make more deadlier weapons. Now, other countries are going to get involved. Other countries don't want to be left behind. But to be honest with you, they're going to be supporting the two superpowers. Okay? But it's a competition to see who could make more weapons faster. Now, with the Soviets having this capability to have nuclear weapons and hydrogen weapons and things like that, President Eisenhower in the 50s comes up with a plan called massive retaliation. Massive retaliation is the statement that if the United States is attacked with a nuclear bomb, our response will be to retaliate on a much larger scale. So, we've been talking about this. This basically comes from the idea that once one side uses a nuclear bomb, the only other alternative is for the other side to use a nuclear bomb. That's basically what we're saying. And we're saying our response is going to be bigger. So if you use one nuclear bomb against us, we'll use two against you. Well, you can bet the Soviet Union isn't going to take that line down. So if they retaliate, they're going to use three against us. This is where we get the concept of mutually assured destruction. Okay, the idea is with massive retaliation, we're going to retaliate on a much larger scale. We're going to use more nuclear weapons. They'll use more nuclear weapons, and then pretty soon everybody's going to be destroyed. Now, the threat of massive retaliation and the threat of mutual destruction also keeps countries at bay. All right. Again, it's what we've been talking about. People begin to realize if we use nuclear weapons, the only way to respond is with more nuclear weapons, and pretty soon everybody's going to die. So this is enough of a threat to keep both sides from using those weapons. We're still going to be creating them. It's a competition, it's a race, but we're going to stop short at using them. Now, this threat of nuclear war leads to some changes in our lifestyle. For example, schools begin to have air raid drills, okay? Duck and cover drills. There you go. The alarm goes off and everybody dives under their desk, okay? Now, we know today that this is probably not going to protect us from nuclear fallout, but it made people feel good. It might protect you from that chunk of ceiling that's going to crash on your head, but you're still going to suffer from nuclear fallout. But it was part of the placebo effect. It made people feel good. Also, the government urges people to build bomb and fallout shelters at their homes, okay, either in their basements or maybe out back, all right. And there were even handbooks about how and construction kits about how you could build a fallout shelter at your own home and what you should stock it with, okay. So instructions about how to build it and what to put in it. Now, another concern besides nuclear fallout, and this is actually tied to nuclear weapons as well, is a concern about spies. People during the Cold War are afraid that spies are around the country, and they're very much concerned that spies are within the government. The Soviets have put spies in there, and part of the reason that they're concerned about spies being within our government is because we kind of let people know we've put spies in the Soviet Union as well. Okay, so that's part of the fear here is, well, if we're spying on them, they must be spying on us too. And one of the first cases to bring this fear to light involved Alger Hiss. Now, here's the story about Alger Hiss. Until 1948, Alger Hiss's career seemed flawless. He was a seemingly dedicated government servant, and he'd worked on several important New Deal agencies and helped to organize the United Nations. But a man named Whittaker Chambers was going to change all that. As a young man, Chambers had become a communist espionage agent. He's a spy. But later, Chambers turns against communism because of the brutality of Stalin's rule. And he begins writing compellingly about the evils of communism. And in 1948, he testified before a House committee about his communist past, and he names Alger Hiss as one of his contacts in the federal government. So Hiss is accused of spying for the Soviet Union. Hiss soon appeared before that committee as well. He denies that he was a communist and an espionage agent. He also denied that he even knew Whittaker Chambers. But a young congressman from California by the name of Richard Nixon convinces other committee members to press the case, and slowly Hiss's stories begin to unravel. Chambers proves that he did know Hiss and that Hiss had given him confidential government documents. Chambers had even kept a microfilm copy of some of those documents in a hollowed out pumpkin in a field in a Maryland farm. Hiss is tried for perjury, which is lying under oath because he said he didn't know Chambers when he really does. The first trial ends in a hung jury, but the second trial finds him guilty, and he is sentenced to 5 years in prison. Okay, so he's convicted of perjury, which is lying under oath, and goes to prison for 5 years. Even after his conviction, many Americans continue to believe that Hiss was innocent. However, as years pass, the evidence grows overwhelmingly against him. The fact that someone as influential as Hiss was a communist agent raised serious concerns and fuels those fears that they are communists within the government. Also, the congressional hearings thrust Richard Nixon in the national spotlight. In 1952, he becomes Eisenhower's running mate. He's going to become vice president and later president of the United States. The next big trial involves Ethel and Julius Rosenberg. The case begins when a scientist named Klaus Fuchs was charged with sending atomic secrets to the Soviet Union. The investigation against Fuchs ultimately leads to the arrest of Ethel and Julius Rosenberg in 1950. The Rosenbergs were charged with conspiring to pass secret information about nuclear science to Soviet agents. Okay, they are members of the Communist Party. The trial of the Rosenbergs generate intense controversy in America and around the world. The case against them was based largely on the word of one confessed spy. Pleading innocent, the Rosenbergs claimed that they were being persecuted for being Jewish and for holding unpopular beliefs because they were members of the Communist Party. In the end, both were found guilty and sentenced to death. So they are accused of giving government information to the Soviets about the atomic bomb, and they are convicted and sentenced to death in 1953. Many believe the harsh sentence was intended as a lever to force them to identify other members of an alleged spy ring, but the Rosenbergs claim they had no such information. After 26 months on death row, the Rosenbergs were electrocuted in 1953. Years of debate followed the execution. Some believe that anti-Semitic sentiment did influence the outcome, but in the 1990s, we find more tangible evidence that yes, Julius Rosenberg was guilty. He was feeding information to the Soviets. and that Ethel did have a part in it as well. Now, the debate is still out. Some people say it was a minor part. Others say no, there's actually more tangible evidence against her as well. But it does seem that the Rosenbergs were feeding evidence and were feeding information to the Soviets. Now, because of this fear of spies and communists within the government, that's going to lead to something called the McCarthy witch hunt. Now, Senator Joseph McCarthy claims that communists are taking over the government. It's a new Red Scare. We talked about this in the 20s, in the time period between World War I and World War II. There was a Red Scare, this belief that communists were taking over the government. Well, now we're going to see another one. McCarthy believes that communists are taking over the government. And he uses Alger Hiss and he uses Ethel Rosenberg as an example. He plays on Americans' fear about spies in the government. And he begins accusing government officials and citizens of being communist based on flimsy or no evidence. He really goes out of hand. Now, were some of the people that he were talking about, were they probably spies? Yes. But he goes overboard in his accusations. And they're based on flimsy or no evidence. This is going to lead to a term that we still use today called McCarthyism. McCarthyism refers to making false accusations based on rumor or guilt by association. Did McCarthy probably accuse some people of being communists who were communist? Yes. But by and large, the majority of people he accused were not, and he was basing those accusations on fear and using rumor and guilt by association to get people to believe him. Now, eventually, it gets out of hand. He starts accusing certain politicians' families of being communist, and when he begins to do that, Congress is going to come back and going to shut him down. He also accuses people like Edward R. Murrow, who was a very well-respected journalist at the time. He accuses him of having communist tendencies and stuff like that. Well, everybody loved Edward R. Murrow. So when McCarthy begins making accusations like that, people are like, well, we got to stop. Okay. And eventually they realize this is ridiculous. He's got no proof and we're buying into it. Okay. And people will turn on McCarthy. The last thing we're going to talk about is the Cold War benefits to our state, Virginia. One of the key components of the Cold War, of any Cold War policy, deals with the military. Okay, those are the two big influences that we've talked a lot about, the military and foreign policy. Okay, we talked about containment in terms of foreign policy, containment, the Truman Doctrine, the Marshall Plan. All those are part of our foreign policies to stop the spread of communism. Part of the key to stopping the spread of communism is to have a strong military. And that's what's going to benefit Virginia. There are going to be heavy military expenditures that will benefit Virginia's economy and continue to benefit our economy. Two areas of note. One is in Hampton Roads, okay? Hampton Roads, Norfolk, Suffolk, Chesapeake, okay? That area. You're going to find a lot of air and naval bases in that part of the state, okay? And it comes from this Cold War spending. We want to be sure we have a strong Navy and a strong Air Force to combat communism and get us to places where we're fighting against communism, okay? So there's a lot of ports. There's a lot of access to the water in Hampton Roads. It's a good place to build army, or a good place to build air and naval bases, okay? So you're going to see a lot of money coming into the Hampton Roads area in terms of bases for the Navy and the Air Force. Then, of course, we can't deny Northern Virginia, okay? Northern Virginia is where the Pentagon is located. And there are a bunch of private companies, okay? In fact, there's a question on the quiz about how the Cold War impacts Virginia. Well, the Cold War impacts Virginia because it improves the economy. Because of these private companies who contract with the military, they're going to be based in Northern Virginia because they want access to the Pentagon. The Pentagon is where the military is run from, okay? So Virginia's economy is going to get a shot in the arm. It's going to get a boost from military spending, both in Hampton Roads with our air and naval bases and in Northern Virginia with these private companies that are contracting with the military. Now, real quickly, those are just some of the ways that the Cold War is impacting the state, some of the issues that we're dealing with in the country as we move through the Cold War. Our next lesson, we'll talk about the end of the Cold War. Be sure you review this material and then take your little quiz on the impact of the Cold War in the United States.